So hello everyone listening to Fire and Forte today. I'm with Katy Graczer. Every
So funny.
time.
Grasser.
Graczer, sorry. I mean, like, let's just be real here, okay? So Katy Graczer is unbelievably 49. I've obviously got a speech impediment. Originally from London and a party girl. Katy moved to Sydney around 20 years ago and made some big changes to that lifestyle. The corporate career remained, and the really fun personality who loves a party remained. But Katy began working in the wellness industry as a yoga teacher, as well as the corporate career. She discovered the importance and power of breath and really became an advocate in this wellness space. I think critically, what's really interesting and what me and my friends are talking about a lot at the moment is going alcohol free. And Katy has been alcohol free for almost four years. So huge well done, and just demonstration that, we can do it when we've been party girls and we've had a good time. It doesn't have to be that you've always lived this very wholesome life. So Katy, you're also a busy mum. You've got two children, two stepchildren and two rescue dogs. And I know that you work with both in your corporate career in tech, which is busy. You've got your own yoga mat business, the Yoga Pod, of which you're wearing the baseball cap now. And you run these Power of Breath workshops. But firstly, welcome to Fire and Forte.
Thanks so much. It's so nice to be here. Yeah, I'm repping the brand today.
Very cool. And it's a very good Bondi look, isn't it? Are you Bondi in Australia?
Yeah,
or?
I'm pretty much Bondi. I'm in Bronte, which is a little bit more wanky than Bondi, I guess. But yeah, I love living here. I actually thought that when I first moved to Bondi or Bronte, it was a bit of a Bronte, it was a bit of a cliche, but in actual fact there's an awesome community of people here, and very real. It's very Australian. It's very relaxed and active. It's kind of nice. And
whereabouts are you from in London?
So I'm from North London, which is probably the opposite of where I live now. I grew up on a council estate, housing commission for Australian listeners, in North London, which was really pretty rough. Yeah, I had a bit of a different upbringing, and I'm delighted to be able to raise my children here. The only challenge with that, of course, is that they're not really amongst much diversity or adversity. So it's I've come from diversity, adversity, and into this like very white bread environment where everybody's quite joyful, happy, and doesn't really come up against much, I guess, difference. And so yeah, it's an absolute luxury and privilege to live here, and I'm very aware of that. And I think if I hadn't grown up in the roughest part of North London, I probably wouldn't be aware of that. So
well, it's great to be grateful, isn't it? And to really recognise that. Would you mind giving us a quick potted history of how you ended up going from North London to getting to Sydney? Because I think it's probably an example of your fire and your forte, that you've grown up there and ended up living such a idyllic life.
It's really interesting, and I look back on it a lot and I think, God, there must be so much luck. But I think also in hindsight, I've realized that there was an alignment that wasn't really there when I was growing up. And I don't know whether I was different to everybody, because there are still the people that I grew up with in North London, although, I mean, I never really felt comfortable in my own skin in those environments. I was probably not the most popular kid, which I'm very grateful for now, because that led me to looking for other tribes. But growing up in North London, I think there's an edge that you have to have in order to really survive, because there's not a lot of thriving that goes on when you grow up, in those rough areas. It's a survival mechanism until you get to your older life. And I did all right at school, not outstanding. I think I was pretty smart, but socially it was challenging. And pretty much as soon as I hit 17, I just wanted to get out of there. And I think that's a drive that is intrinsic within you, because there were lots of other people that had the same experiences that I did, but really kind of just stayed, got married, had babies, and are still living pretty close to where I grew up, and have had very different lives to me. And I used to look at them and go, oh God, why aren't they getting out more? Why aren't they traveling? Why aren't they meeting new and different people? And I've realized now that for some people that isn't what aligns with them. For some people, they've got a very strong sense of home and safety and being where they grew up. And for me, it wasn't like that at all. I never felt home. So I think I moved to Greece when I was 18 for a short period of time. I was very lucky that I've got the gift of the gab, and I managed to get into an organization, a tech company, actually. It was telecoms, but tech back in the day, that had offices in Europe. And so I was able to travel with work for a little bit. And I just kept finding myself through luck and connection in these really great businesses that allowed me to travel. And the more I traveled, the more I realized I didn't, necessarily fit into the life that I had grown up in. So I think when I was about 28 or 29, I was working for a really great business. I was earning good money. I was traveling quite a bit with work. I'm not entirely sure what my job was, but I was taking advantage of the tech boom at the time, and I got made redundant, and I had a bit of cash, and I wasn't in a relationship. And so I decided I had an assistant at the time who was Australian. She said, just come to Australia for a while until the job market picks up. Never thought about traveling to Australia. I always thought it would be much like the UK, but just hotter. I didn't think it would be, interesting, or I just didn't know what to expect, but it'd never been on my radar. And then I got here, and I think within 3 or 4 days, I was like, I'm never going home. And there were a couple of aha moments that I had. I remember I was going to a job interview after about 2 or 3 days for a temp job, and I got on a bus and it was raining. And I remember saying to the bus driver, can you let me know when to get off the bus? Because I'm pretty new. And he was like, yeah, sure. Told me when to get off. And he gave me an umbrella. And I said to him, what? And he goes, just take the umbrella. I don't want you to get wet. It's obvious you're going for a job interview. And he was just so sweet. And I was like, God, I've lived in London for all this time, and people just grunt at you, or there was very little sort of positive interaction that I could recall. And within 2 or 3 days, I just noticed that the sky was higher here. Everyone was happier, sunnier. There was more of a connection, sitting on a tube every day, going to and from work in London, and not speaking to anyone on the tube, because it was, I felt like it was a more fearful environment, and a very sense of community was lacking in London for me. And then when I got here and I realized that sense of community and friendship and support for one another was actually, it felt a lot higher than it had been where I grew up. I was like, yeah, this is my space. And I also felt like no one was really looking at me, to see whether I had a certain amount of money. I didn't feel that there was a currency in wealth in Australia like there was in London. And I think that when you grow up in poor backgrounds, I think the hip hop is a really good example of when poor people become rich, there's a really big display of wealth. There's Gucci loafers, there's flashy cars, there's expensive jewelry, there's brand name fashion. And I felt that in the eastern suburbs, it was almost frowned upon a little bit. People were they didn't want to see those displays of wealth. They were just just chill. It's barefoot. We just, and even though there's a different, I guess, sense of class here, the luxury is really just in the freedom rather than what you have or what you do. And I think that really spoke to me. So I ended up staying. I didn't go home for 5 years. I got myself a couple of really, decent jobs. So I was very lucky. And now I feel that it was very easy to find my tribe here.
So for your corporate career, how did that then work with training as a yoga teacher, and then setting up some, because you've got Yoga Pod, which is your own range of yoga mats. Mm-hmm. So how and when did those two things come together?
Well, I think like most people, I had an active interest in a wellness sort of side hustle, which for me was yoga. I was practicing yoga every day. It's something that's helped me balance out my corporate life. And I was very lucky that I experienced a number of teachers that encouraged me to do my teacher training. But when I did my teacher training, which was quite some time ago now, I had no intention to teach. I didn't really have any space in my life to do that. It was really just to deepen my practice. And then I was asked to teach a little bit when I got back, and that became a regular thing. Although I've never taught full time, I teach. I have 2 regular classes a week at my local studio, and I occasionally do one-on-ones. But to be honest, I just love connecting with people in that way. I have a very unique take on the way I teach yoga. It's very different to a lot of yoga teachers. I try and keep it fun. I try to make it accessible, and that's pretty much how I do most things. Even with my corporate sales job, I like to keep it simple and and fun and interesting. I like all my interactions to be engaging. So I feel very lucky. I teach a little bit.
probably most of my friends now and most of my connections worldwide are yoga friends. I've got, I left behind 22 years ago when I moved to Australia, a whole life that probably doesn't feature too highly in the way I live now. And that would be a transition away from alcohol, partying, a lot of corporate travel, which I don't do so much of now. So yeah, my life now is very, very different to my life when I left the UK. However, I've had like a constant theme of being able to thrive in a corporate environment, in a sales environment. And I feel very lucky because I think that set me up for success indeed into my 40s.
And there's similarities, like you say. So is that how you started to find your purpose, that you've got a unique thing in the fact that you connect with people? Because like you say about yoga, it's probably quite different to make it fun. I certainly feel as though I always need to go in and think, oh, I haven't practiced my intention. I'm supposed to bring an intention. And sometimes it can feel quite, serious. So is that something, your personality, is that being consistent throughout? And how do you bring it into your different jobs now?
Yeah, 100%. I used to think it was a liability, my personality, for yoga and for corporate, because I've always been one of those people that find it very difficult to be anything other than I am. I can tend to be quite loud. I talk a lot, and I've tried to tone that down a little bit and lift my listening skills. But those things, I think I came into an acceptance around as I got a little bit older, and stopped trying to be different and really embrace the things that I found that were rewarding me, I guess, in my connections. And I learned something really early on in yoga, in that, yoga itself can be quite a dogmatic practice. There's a range of, if we're talking about the actual movement practice, and there's lots of different arms of yoga, but most people think about the asana practice, so the shapes and the poses that you make when you go to a yoga class. And if you think about that, there's very little variation. We pretty much all do down dogs. We pretty much all do warriors. There's some standing up stuff, some laying down stuff, but it is what it is in terms of the traditional practice. And it's quite, the only thing that you can bring to your yoga class that makes it different to anybody else's is yourself. And when I gave myself permission to teach in a Cockney accent and to, not put on a fake yoga voice and, speak really, and also to give the students permission to show up exactly as they were, whether that was agitated or, in a Zen position, or, really understand where the students are at, and then give them a class that they can work with. That was a real eye-opener for me. And even though I still feel like I have imposter syndrome when I teach, because I go to so many incredible yoga teachers who just are breathtakingly brilliant at their craft, I still feel that the feedback I get from my students is that Katy's fun, Katy makes it accessible, and she has some wise words that sits behind it. But the main thing is just show up. And I get that feedback from my students, not just at yoga, but at Power of the Breath. And in my corporate life, I build pretty much all of my success on the rapport and the connection I have with the people that I'm speaking to. And if I don't understand their needs and their challenges, then I'm not going to be able to support them. And I'm very forthright about sometimes not being able to support them. If they have a need that I can't meet, then I will direct them somewhere else, because I don't want anybody to have an experience of me that is not aligned with theirs.
I think there's a big lesson there about the 40s of embracing yourself. It's the only way that you can reach your optimal, how you can be your best, because in your 20s or 30s, in corporate or in yoga, if you were being somebody else, you probably wouldn't have released your unique skill at it. And the reason why people would choose you over another employee to get the job, or another yoga teacher. So it's a really nice point to say, I embraced myself, yoga, Cockney accent, found all these skills that no one else had, rapport, communication. And I think that then enables you to be your best.
I think other people have it. I think that I was trying to change what I had, because I didn't feel like I fit into the mold. I spent probably my teens, my 20s and my 30s trying to be somebody different. Like it's relentless. Like,
wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of time that you spend beating yourself up about, being yourself. And that's not to say that I don't want to improve, but I think there's a very big difference between looking at myself and others as if we're wrong, and then looking at myself and others as if there's possibilities, right? So it's more, I don't want to be critical of myself, because that would be suggesting that something's wrong. But I want to say to myself, you're capable of more. And that's kind of how I embrace my students. It's more about like, you know, you are great where you are. Like, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you, but you don't even know your potential. Let's take it there. And I think that's, so what I started doing was looking at myself from a baseline and just saying, you know what, this is really great. This is really great. This is where we've got some possibilities where we can move forward. Let's look at that. And so it's going to be a work in progress, and I will die probably not being able to listen well, because I try so hard to not over talk, but I get very excited when I get an idea and I have to say it before I forget it. So, but I'm conscious of it and I'm aware of it. And I sometimes apologize for it if I speak over people, because, you know, it sits in the back of my mind, but I no longer think it's wrong. I just think that it's possible for me to be better.
I think it's quite nice that we can all admit to that we've often tried to be like the most popular girl at school, or be a little bit demure, or pretend to be more confident than we are. Maybe if we all just say, God, I wasted some time trying to be someone else.
It's fascinating to me. I look at young people now, and maybe it's the tribe I spend time with, but I just think they're so much more confident than I was when I was that age. I probably didn't give off a less than confident vibe when I was in my 20s or 30s, but it would have been a real act, a real level of you know, trying to fit in. I think trying to fit in and trying to conform was something that I used to do a lot in my 20s and my 30s. And I realize now that the most attractive part about somebody is when they stop trying to fit in and stop trying to conform. Because, you know, I say this to my kids all the time, and of course they won't realize it until they realize it, but it's like, you know, what's special about you is the fact that you have all these things that nobody else has. And that's what we need to, you know, get excited about. But we live in a society where we reward, you know, certain things, right? We use as a currency, the way you look is a currency, the way you behave is a currency, the people you hang out with, what you wear, all of those things are currencies. And so I can see the pressure that people feel under to try and change themselves.
What advice would you give to people in their 40s that are maybe thinking, oh, I'm not feeling so great? Or people much earlier than that, in their 20s, to say, what's some of the life advice that you could impart from what you've learned about yourself on your journey?
Oh, I wish I knew in my 20s and 30s what I know now, that's for sure. And I am seeing a lot of women in their 20s and 30s starting to embrace these practices earlier, which I think is just such a gift. They're so much more confident and knowledgeable, I think, than I was when I was younger. Because, you know, some of these practices are becoming more mainstream and less fringe. And so, you know, it's not as weird to do them. Honestly, becoming alcohol free was probably a big game changer for me in terms of anxiety. I am fairly busy. It would be, you know, and not necessarily productive, just busy. So I was probably holding quite a lot of stress and tension in my body that, you know, on some occasions that I was using alcohol in order to be free of that. And I didn't realize it at the time. I've been drinking since I was 13 years old. It's a rite of passage. I've been drinking and smoking since I was 13 years old. I would suggest in North London. It was almost, you know, that was how you transitioned from a child to an adult, is that you would start going to the pub, you would start, you know, meeting other adults at the pub, and that was a social life. And every celebration, every commiseration, every holiday, alcohol was associated. And to be honest, I don't think I really ever had a good relationship with alcohol. I think it was, my body was physically rejecting it in a number of ways when I was very young, but I pushed through, I kept going. And, you know, and I was, you know, having hangovers, making bad decisions, blacking out on occasion, urinary infections, all of the above, you know, all of these horrible things. But because I was under the impression, and I was so desperate to fit into the box and do what everybody else was doing and party like everybody else was doing, I would overlook those things, or I would question myself and say, what is wrong with me? Why can't I, you know, get pissed like everybody else and wake up the next day and, you know, jog around the block? What's happening to me? And honestly, it took me, it would have taken me 30 years to quit properly, and I tried a couple of times prior to that, but I just couldn't see my life without alcohol. I didn't understand what it would look like. And so when I finally quit, which was about 4 years ago now, I mean, it was one of those moments that was rock bottom for sure. I'd been day drinking, I'd fallen over, I'd lost my wallet. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My kids saw me. And I still probably, if I hadn't woken up the next day and just realized that how incredibly detrimental it had become, I probably wouldn't have stopped. And I planned to just stop for like 20 days and then go to my friend's wedding, get on the champagne again. And I did 4 or 5 days, and something in me knew it was a different time. I was like, I don't want to go back to where I was. It was so hard. And I don't want to say it wasn't. It was because I had to relearn everything. I had to go on holiday without drinking. I couldn't even fathom the thought of not having a margarita when I was after the beach one day. I had to go on a sales conference to the US and not drink. Free champagne all day, no alternative. Like, ugh. I had to fly business class without going to a business class lounge and getting a glass of Moët, or get on a plane without a glass of Moët. All of these things were really triggering for me because my identity was wrapped up in being a drinker. And so it was very hard. The first month or two was hard. And then I got to a point and I was getting so much positive feedback. People were like, wow, you're not drinking. That's amazing. I wish I could do that. I would hear that a lot. I wish I could do that. And I was like, it's hard because society just really pushes us towards booze all the time. And when you take a step back from it and you realize that not only is it poison to your body, it fully is. And my body luckily works quite well. I was just going, get out of me, yucky poison, it's disgusting. But, there's a chemical trigger in your brain that, keeps you going, even when you should probably stop. And ultimately, it does remove that consequence aspect of your behavior. So yes, for the first 2 or 3 drinks, you can feel really confident and perhaps do things. I was an amazing snowboarder when I'd had a couple of red wines at the top of the mountain, but my inability to stop there, and I would continue and continue and continue to the point where I would be falling out of I would be a liability to people around me. I would make a fool of myself. And the anxiety the next day, or hangxiety, I think they call it, when you're just like, what did I say? Who did I talk to? Where are my pants? Those types of questions, which I know come up all the time. And you feel like there's something wrong with you because you can't process alcohol like other people. But in actual fact, now I see it as a strength, that if I can't process alcohol, it's because my body's saying, this is not good for you. And so, so stopping drinking, I think in hindsight, if I look back, I probably used that as a crutch. At the time, I just thought I was doing what everybody else was doing. But I would say that, in order to take the edge off life, I would have used alcohol. And I don't think that I look any different. A lot of people say they see a, reduction in puffiness, or, they lose weight. For me, it was kind of the opposite. I probably gained weight because it gave me a lot of space in my day, not thinking about alcohol, not drinking. That gives you a lot of space, and you have to use that space wisely. I used it to sometimes eat lollies, but I would find myself going to bed much earlier. People think it's boring. And I would suggest that if your idea of a good time is going out and staying up until 3 o'clock and getting hammered and, and picking up random strangers and talking to people that aren't that interesting, then yeah, it would probably be boring in comparison. But I say that what I've done is I haven't given anything up. I've created space in my life for fresh mornings, for clarity, for not being a dick. I would have been a dick a lot. And now if I'm a dick, it's because I really am a dick rather than the drink.
I think that so many people talk about the anxiety. So many people want to quit, but it is that thing to reach for at the end of a bad day, or at the end of receiving a bad email, or having an argument with a loved one. So for those moments, how have you replaced those triggers? If you've had a bad day, you mentioned earlier going on holiday and looking forward to that margarita, the champagne at your friend's wedding, all of those are key moments that we all think, well, what would I do instead? What would be your advice for those moments?
Oh, it's tough. And I think that you have to use all of the tools and tricks that will get you to a place where those stop being moments. So originally with weddings, I would take my own alcohol-free version of whatever it is they're serving, and everyone's very, very kind about it. You can't, unfortunately, and it's really disappointing, you can't expect venues, weddings, birthdays, airports to actually support the alcohol-free notion. There's a lot in them to support the alcohol, a lot for them to support the alcohol industry. So sometimes it can be tricky. So you do have to plan ahead and think about what you're going to drink instead, or if indeed you're going to, I like holding a glass. I like holding a sophisticated wine glass. So I'll usually put something in it, kombucha, alcohol. There's some great alcohol-free products out there. And if any of your listeners are interested in some really great alcohol-free brands that are really talking the talk and walking the walk, I can definitely recommend those. But take something with you to support you that maybe even tastes a little like your alcoholic version, just to get you through those tricky moments. So those tricky moments you have to be prepared for. I would also say that telling people in advance, I can honestly tell you that a wedding becomes intolerable when everybody else is hammered and you've been there for 6 hours and you're trying not to drink. Trust me. So, and not everybody is hammered, but small talk can be difficult when you're not pissed. It really can. And so tell people before you go, hey, I'm not drinking. I might ghost at about 8 o'clock. And then they don't have any expectations of you, because I think particularly with people that have challenges with stopping drinking once they've started, is that we're always the last person to leave, right? And so people expect that of us. They expect us to be up on stage. They expect us to be dancing wildly. They expect us to be doing the splits. And so you need to prepare people for the fact that you probably won't be, and you're just going to sneak off, and take pride in it. Like, this is a good thing that you're doing. And for every person that is a little bit defensive about you drinking, and that will happen, people will go, oh, you're not drinking. Oh, did you have a problem? Or blah, blah, blah. I think for every person that feels that way, and that's usually because they've got a problem themselves and they're challenged by it, there'll be 5 people that wish that they could do what you're doing. It is tough, and you will miss that moment. And if you're having to your point around a sort of like a tricky moment, like a life moment where you would normally, wash away the pain with Moe, it happens. They're hard, because you have to sometimes face the things that you've been blocking out for a little while. So again, use the support that's available. There's a lot of really great, if you do think that it's going to be really tough for you to stop, get a coach. There are lots of alcohol-free coaches in there, sober coaches, who are brilliant, who've all been where you are. Incredible amounts of podcasts and books that will support you. And there's some really, and they're not all, none of this is Alcoholics Anonymous. That wouldn't have been something that worked for me. I didn't want to declare that I had a problem. I actually think that booze is the problem. And without booze, I don't have a problem. So once I've eliminated booze from my life, I actually don't consider myself to be an alcoholic. I don't consider myself to be somebody that is addicted to alcohol. I consider myself to be somebody that was using alcohol socially to lift me up.
And there's a boldness, I suppose, in that moment when you're not drinking. You can just be yourself, but also own it, I suppose. Because if you say, I'm not drinking, I'm going to do a smoke bomb, actually isn't owning it. Just, so what it's maybe coming back to not being afraid what people are going to say, because at the end of the day, you'll wake up the next day ready to go for a run or a walk or get up for the children, whatever that thing will be. You're going to be very smug, aren't you?
You always feel good about it the next day. That's a fact. And you have a lot less boring conversations. So trust me, your chances of being sexually harassed or spending time with people that are less than you would require of a person ordinarily, those chances are eliminated when you stop drinking, because you just, your awareness is there. Those red flags go up early.
Another great way to have self-esteem and self-value is that when you're sober, you like yourself. It might feel uncomfortable, but the conversations that you'll have with people will be the real you. Listening to someone else that aligns to the real you, and probably that does feel a lot more rewarding than the fake drunk conversations that you had by the time.
And it is uncomfortable fully. Like sometimes you don't feel in your flow at all. And that's okay, because that's sometimes a sign that you just go, well, maybe I could benefit from an early night, and I should just.
And what I love is that this for you started at 45.
Yeah.
believe. You gave up drinking at 45. So I think the message comes out loud and clear. It's never too late. And then you've got this whole new life to live.
Yeah.
A fresh start, if you like.
I think if I can advise anybody to do anything when they're young, it's to find the people that really lift you up. Because if you feel a little sense of, being uncomfortable or not in the right place or not comfortable in your own skin or not able to have a voice without being fearful of what, people think of you, the chances are you haven't quite found your tribe.
Great advice. Yeah. So friendship, strong group of friends, would you say?
Yeah, or just people that are aligned with your way of thinking. It's really hard, I think, particularly in England, when you grow up, to be different. I think that there's a real conformity thing. I mean, and perhaps, I didn't grow up in the most creative environment. So I'm sure that there's like little pockets of places. But I think that it was a very linear way of living. There was shopping, there was the pub, that was it, really. There wasn't much of an active lifestyle outside football. I didn't really spend time with people that were healthy. And so I didn't really know that there was anything other than the party lifestyle and and buying lots of clothes and trying to get as much money as possible so that you can, buy a bigger house or live in a better area. I thought that was it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I started meeting people that were really comfortable with being outside of those boxes that I was like, oh, okay, I can do something that I've got to find something that I'm interested in. And then when I do, maybe somebody will pay me for it. And that was an absolute revelation.
I think that's really good advice going about the tribe side, because, keep going. It's often who you're surrounded with, isn't it? So if your friends are into the bling, then you end up into the bling.
Yeah.
Whereas I know the other weekend I went away to visit family in another city, and they're really into painting, watercolors. And I reflected on that afterwards, thinking, I'm not arty at all, but I think that's just because I'm not around those kind of people. I used to be quite arty. I guess that if you try different groups, you might sample different things. Maybe that is painting, maybe that is surfing, maybe that is that you are really interested in opening up your own business or something. So I suppose finding your own tribe, trying to get out of whatever you're in, can give you
you can have a foot in both camps. I mean, I'm not dismissing the value that I actually gained from living the way I did for such a long period of time. I think it's really hard to find your tribe if you don't know what your tribe isn't, right? So there's a lot of, but I have a foot firmly in both camps. I haven't sort of transferred. I still, the things that I value from where I grew up is the banter, the survival, the fearlessness that you have to have. The diversity, so important, and hugely missing from my life in Australia, really. The different music, the different languages, the different cultures, and in some cases the suffering, like, in all honesty, like, knowing that people are living paycheck to paycheck and being conscious of money. And now I'm fairly abundant financially. That's a gift in your 40s for sure. I've managed to, get myself comfortable. So I don't have to worry about money. I don't have to worry about food. I don't have to worry about putting a roof over my head, which when I grew up was something that people really did have to have concerns about. So I'm always conscious of that. Like, I'm always really aware of, just being conscious of where I came from and trying to apply it where possible in my new abundant life, which everybody deserves, I think.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant as well, to imagine you amongst a group of Australian colleagues or mums in the playground, because you would bring an extra level of, banter, I think they call it. I heard someone use Australian say banter the other day. And it would be very fresh, a fresh perspective and a fresh personality, vice versa. In the UK, if an Australian would have turned up at the playground, I know before at university, someone visiting from Australia, and they seemed sunny, they seemed relaxed. So I think there's also a role that you play with your tribe, no matter what your background.
Yeah.
But don't lose yourself. Yourself is still just so important. Could you tell us a bit more about Power of Breath? Because I know that you facilitate workshops, and I'd love to know more about those.
Yeah, no, I'm really lucky to be involved in this as much as I am, because it was my partner's passion project for quite some time. So Dean, my partner, he's been into, holistic health and wellness for way longer than I have, and really has been walking the walk. And so we together got involved with Wim Hof, which you guys might be familiar with, about 5 or 6 years ago. Prior to that, of course, we'd been practicing breath work because we're both into yoga. I've been a yoga teacher for quite some time, so I'm very conscious of the way I breathe, and that's a very natural transition when you practice yoga as much as I do. You become very conscious of the way you breathe. There's an awareness that just isn't there if you've never done any type of yoga or breath work. So it wasn't an alien concept to me. In yoga, we call it pranayama, which is, they refer to breath as being part of your life force, part of your prana, part of your chi. And ayama means expansion and yama means control. So whenever you do any type of breath work practice in yoga, it's either breath or life force expansion or breath or life force control. And so you use the breath as a tool during any type of meditation or asana practice, which is movement practice. So I was aware of it. And then Dean was using the Wim Hof technique, which is a super ventilation practice alongside cold therapy, to become energized. He wasn't sleeping very well, and we got quite interested in it. So we spent some time with Wim. He came here, we went there, and we really got fascinated, I guess, by the power of the breath. And that was really how the power of the breath was formed. Then Dean started teaching Wim Hof. It became a little bit of a thing here, probably just before it was very mainstream. And we noticed some incredible transformation in people. And interestingly, with breath work, whether you're using slow breathing techniques or fast breathing techniques, there's a transformation that can happen in people that aren't usually breathing consciously. And it can be quite dramatic, particularly with superventilation. So superventilation is an energizing practice, and it can bring out a lot of emotions. Moving the breath through the body can actually bring emotion. Emotions are just energy in motion. And sometimes they get stuck. And so when you breathe vigorously and consciously, whether that's slowly or quickly, that energy moves around. And sometimes that can be represented in, some sort of display of emotion, crying, anger, laughter, or sometimes it can just be an overwhelming feeling of there's something here that's moving. And so Wim Hof was a very clear example of that. We used to see quite a lot of transformational experiences, particularly we used to see men come to the groups, and obviously we would suggest that they're probably not as transformed in the way of sharing and emotions. And so it would be sometimes much more obvious with the men in the group when they would open up. But as we became more interested in functional breathing, because we really started nerding out on what was happening, and we wanted some science to back us up, because I think both Dean and I want to make these type of practices accessible to people, and they often are popular with the spiritual tribe, but sometimes we want to bring people in that are a little bit fearful of going straight to an eye gazing practice or straight into an asana practice. We want to bring people in and say to them, anybody can do this. It's a gateway to meditation. Try it, see how you feel. If it works for you, use it. If it doesn't, leave it behind. So we started looking into functional breath work. So that's like people that have dysfunctional breathing are people who snore, people who are sleeping poorly, people that perhaps are holding a lot of stress and anxiety in the body. And it all really connects to our nervous system and regulating our nervous system and being able to do that. When Dean studied further, we studied with a man called Patrick McEwen, who is based out of Ireland, but he has a whole series of books, and his business is called The Oxygen Advantage, which is based on the Buteyko method, and it's a whole wealth of information about what's actually happening in the body when we breathe better and how we can transform our lives. I think Patrick started it primarily because he was struggling to concentrate at school and he couldn't understand why, and started investigating all these methods. And then when he really looked into it, he realized how transformative just functional breathing can be. So this isn't woo-woo breathwork techniques. They're simply, carbon dioxide tolerance and all of these really interesting nitric oxide production, all of these very interested scientific explanations for what happens when we breathe well and what happens when we breathe poorly.
And can I ask you a question while you're just to clarify for me, is this a workshop that you do once a week, or are you giving advice for breathing all day, every day?
So our workshop comprises of all of those. So what we've tried to do with Power of the Breath is bring in some information about functional breathing, so what you should be doing daily if you can, some functional breath work for performance, so accelerating that, making yourself better from a wellness perspective and also from an active perspective. And then we also give you a breathing experience that should maybe transcend your conscious state. So take you into altered states of mind. That would be a superventilation practice, which moves you from your parasympathetic nervous system to your sympathetic nervous system to your parasympathetic nervous system and vice versa. So, and they're controlled breathing practices that trains the body to regulate the nervous system. But you also can experience, and not everybody does, but you can experience some, really great altered states from this type of breath work. So, people get in touch, but they have experiences in their body and their mind that they wouldn't ordinarily have. And that can be a revelation in itself.
I've actually heard a friend go to a breath session and she said she cried uncontrollably.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, and we see it a lot, and I think that some people really enjoy the process because of that. It allows them to let go of stuck emotions, and they're very aware that that's what the practice will do. In other experiences that we've had, people haven't expected that kind of release, and you have to give people permission to release, because again, we're sometimes very conscious of what other people will think of us, and the creation of a safe space and the information that we give people is to really embrace those feelings and to release them if they can, because that's the purpose of the breath work. There are breathwork practices that include, trauma release, and they're very, I would say they're very deep practices that require a lot of effort, and that's not something that we offer right now. We are simply introducing people to the power of the breath in different ways. So regulating the nervous system, changing your state of consciousness, or even just to calm yourself down, or give you little tools and techniques to calm yourself down. But primarily, we really just want people to breathe better. There's a book that became very popular about a year and a half ago called Breath by James Nestor, and a lot of people have read it or listened to him speak on a podcast. He's a journalist, and he speaks about it incredibly, way more articulately than I ever could, about how we as a human race, I guess, but particularly in Western cultures, have changed the way we breathe, and this has been very detrimental to our health. And there's a number of reasons for that. Physiologically, we're not as optimal in our face structure, like a lot of us weren't breastfed, a lot of us are eating, poorly, we're not chewing as much, which, opens up our airways. And so that can restrict the way we breathe. And so we have to train ourselves to go back to primarily a nasal breath, reduce the amount of mouth breathing that we do. And ultimately, that will give us more energy, it will help us sleep better, it will help our body relax. There's lots of incredible things that happen when we move to a primarily nasal breathing practice. And that's all day, every day.
Well, thank you so much for your time and generosity, sharing all of this wisdom that you've got. Is there any last words of, I suppose, what you're hoping to get out of your 50s that you've learned from your 40s that we could maybe glean from you?
Oh, well, you guys are going to have to support me into my 50s. You're going to need to do a podcast called Fire on 50. I am, look, honestly, I'm very excited about going into my 50s with good health. I think that when I was younger, that was not something that I anticipated from people who were my age. And so, and I do feel much younger than I am in my mind. I don't think we ever grow up. And I think that, continuing to play and have fun and, be joyful and be adventurous and in awe of things are very, very important in order to thrive in your 40s and your 50s. I think that, the generations before us perhaps were taught that when they were in their 40s and 50s, that's when you become even more demure, even more, I guess, sober, not in a not drinking way, but in a really sort of, like dull way. It's almost like you disappear off the face of the earth and you can't have fun anymore. And I think, now I have more money than I've ever had, and, more free time than I've ever had, because I don't go on the piss anymore, and I don't, have to, I'm not on the up in my career. I'm just sort of flatlining before I go down. So I'm able to now really enjoy my life and try new things and have new experiences. I'm so privileged to be able to do all of those things. And so it would be a crying shame if I just decided now that, you know, this was where I just stopped being healthy and stopped being active. This is when I actually need my health and my active and my mobility the most. So yeah, I'm excited about being in my 50s. You know, perimenopause and menopause is a little bit, but again, you know, like you've got to set yourself up for success, right? So you've got to be conscious and aware and, you know, be really generous to yourself on those down days. I think that we're all going to have moments where we feel vulnerable and unsafe and not super happy. And those moments are where you lean in on your tribe, or withdraw, whatever works for you. But just make sure that, you know, you nurture yourself and you know, listen to yourself. But I think the thing that I've learned most in my 40s is that I am a wise and interesting person who has had a wealth of experiences, but now I understand how to listen to what my body and mind are telling me intuitively. And, you know, it doesn't always work, but I think that I can, with confidence, understand that I'm going to have good days, I'm going to have bad days. I need to respect them both. I don't have to suffer fools gladly. If there's anybody in my life that doesn't make me feel good or lift me up, I can walk away from that, and that's okay. I don't have to hang on to friendships. I need to surround myself with a small group of people that are really supportive and non-toxic. And once you start doing that, then everything else, you know, seems to fall into place, I think.
Thank you so much. I mean, if you're joyful of every day, having fun, you've got the right people around you, that's amazing. And then if you don't, this is quite an empowering moment to say, life's too short, get rid of the people that you don't
make
want
changes. Don't stay if it doesn't feel good. Make changes. Your tribe is waiting for you. There are a bunch of really great people that want you in their lives. So find them.
100%. Thank you so much, Katy, for being so real. And yeah, I think everyone will want to be part of your tribe now.
Oh, come and be part of our tribe. Come and get in the ice with us. We didn't even talk about cold therapy.
Part 2.
Yeah, part 2. Yeah, it would be, and I'd love to hear from anybody. If anybody wants to get sober, or if anybody wants to move into a booze-free life or try it out, I've got lots of recommendations of incredible people that I know. I don't do it, but who do coaching in that area. If you want to do some yoga, you can come see me. If you want to do some breath work and ice baths, come see me. We run retreats and things if people want to get involved, but it's really accessible. It's really fun. We have a very good group of people that come to our stuff, and we'd love you to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. I'll add all of your information to the various links that we send out. Have a great day, and thanks
so much. See you later. Bye, Hannah.
Bye.